Maybe it's out of ignorance, or maybe I'm just a creature of habit, but I keep finding myself dipping back into the same handful of plugins time and time again. I mean, regardless of mood, emotion, or genre, these seem to find their way repeatedly into my DAW because they sound great, they're dead simple to use, but they do what they do exceptionally well. So on today's show, I thought I'd go over those sounds and effects which have become so deeply embedded into my workflow that they really should be immortalized into my own personal Mount Rushmore of plugins. Plus, we're going to listen through the latest submission in my year of taxi, follow up on any returns or forwards, and I provide feedback on a cue written by a member of the 52 Qs community on this week's episode of the 52 Qs podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Qs podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my Year of Taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards and take a listen to this week's submission, which is a return to contemporary hip-hop. And then a little bit later on, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on a solo jazz piano cue written by 52 Qs community member Simon Armitage, so you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. However you found me. I know you have a ton of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. I just want to thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I also want to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Qs who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything going. We're 100% community supported, so you're not going to hear any ads for mattresses or meal plans. But if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Qs and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking much more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So let's go ahead and get on into my Year of Taxi update. And if you'll remember from last week, we submitted The Fan Helps Me Sleep, which is a lo-fi hip-hop cue. And I'm happy to report that that cue has been forwarded. It has been forwarded, and the feedback from Screener 403, what's happening 403, appreciate the love, said what I like most about this song. Hi Dave. I like the production, sound, and balance, and the use of the sax on this mellow lo-fi chill hop instrumental cue. And if you remember from last week, that was the sound I thought might have been the deal breaker. So I'm really happy to learn that they were fine with it. Even as I listened to it over the course of the week, I'm like, is it working? Is it too far out in front? Even had a YouTube commenter say, cliche. The word you're looking for is cliche. Well, that's fine. But it got forwarded, so we'll see what happens. And continuing on, said, I think you could improve this song by nice work, good job. And I forwarded this song because this meets the listings request. So that was going over into our forwards pile, which brings the total to 6 forwards since the first week of January and 3 returns. So doing pretty good, 6 for 3. But so far, I've not been contacted by any of the libraries yet. So while that's I'm pretty happy with the forward rate that we've been going. Nobody's reached out yet, which is fine. That's we'll see how it goes over the course of the end of the year, because at the end of the year, I'm going to lay out some numbers for you and say, this was forwarded, this was returned, this was who I've heard from. And so hopefully to give you an idea, knowing that this is just my experience and it's not everybody's experience, but I am happy that it got forwarded. And even if it doesn't get picked up, I will absolutely find a home. So for this week, I am returning back to contemporary hip hop instrumental cues, and some eagle-eyed folks might have noticed, I will tee up into the section here into Asana. I will tee up what cues I think I'm going to be writing, but it just so happens that I thought I was going to be doing kind of an uplifting cue that was a little bit more like it's like for science documentaries or something, and it really wasn't coalescing. And then kind of in the 11th hour, like Thursday morning or Wednesday or so of last week, another contemporary hip hop instrumental search came through. And so I kind of punted the other one and figured, just for the time being, let's get a few more wins under my belt. I'm going to stick to contemporary hip hop cues. So contemporary hip-hop cues, this is the brief. Contemporary hip-hop instrumentals are needed by a top-notch production music library that's landed tons of placements in TV shows like films and commercials. Brand new to requesting music from Taxi. So I'm guessing they're not new to the industry, but new to Taxi. They're looking for a wide range of mid to up-tempo instrumentals that could be heard on the playlist. And then we see some cues and some references we've heard before, including this Spinnin' by Connor Price and Benz, which was on the references for the last search. And so that's when I was like, okay, I can stick into this wheelhouse and go from there. Now, what I could do is I could submit the cues that were submitted for the last hip hop cue, which is going to be UK Drill Sergeant and and Game Time Decision. I could resubmit those up to this search as well. So far, I'm only kind of sticking to one per week here, and I'm not going to be dogpiling on, and we'll see if those other ones find a home. Anyway. So the reference or the brief goes on to say that please send them well-produced hip-hop instrumentals with catchy hooks, slick beats, and top-notch arrangements that are oozing with commercial mainstream appeal and could work well for a variety of placements. Can range from hip-hop spectrum. So your submissions can range from the hip hop spectrum. I have trouble talking today. From epic to fun, from trap to pop influenced, to just about anywhere in between. Whichever approach you choose to take, please be sure your production is polished and any virtual sounds or samples are high quality. General ballpark of the references. If you have trend-setting tracks that could sound at home in social media or influencer content, interesting. This company wants to hear them. So this might be a library providing cues up for Instagram, TikTok, and that kind of thing. So they're looking for 90 seconds to 3 minutes, clean beginnings, non-faded endings with buttons. That's no problem. And then a heads up about cut downs, 60, 30, and 15 plus stems, but not yet. And I like that they go ahead and that they lay this out on the front end, delivered 24-bit 48K WAV files. And so that's super helpful. And then more information about 60, 30, and 50-second versions need to be very precise, which this point actually came up in the panel that I did at Taxi at the Road Rally this past year, this idea of cut downs, and that's how some libraries, when they say that they want a 60-second cut down, they want a WAV file that is exactly 60 seconds. But my experience is a little bit different. All of the cues that I work with that I've submitted up through Discovery Channel, they have a different requirement. Their requirement is about button placement and hitting the button within 3 to 5 seconds of the 30 seconds or the 60 seconds. So a 60-second cut down, the button would hit at between 25 and 28 seconds or so. And then as long as the ring out sounds natural, the editors can trim that back if they want. This says here that they're wanting they need to actually be 59.5 seconds and 29.5 seconds. But this was, like I said, we talked about this on the panel, and that seemed to catch folks by surprise. And I'm thinking, Discovery Channel is one of the largest players in the market, in the unscripted TV market. And but regardless, they're asking for that. And so that's not a problem, just means a little bit more work. So the cue that I wrote this week is called Gotta Get Medieval. which features a flute hook, which is inspired a little bit by Game Time Decision, which I did in the previous submission, as well as the Spinnin' reference had a flute. And this isn't a sampled flute. This is actually me playing my my native flute here. And so played it, and then once it was in, I essentially treated it like a sample, like I brought it off of Splice. And so that is that was how I put that together. And so this is Gotta Get Medieval. Yeah, so another kind of trap drill inspired cue. That flute, man, really happy with that. And if you want to see a complete breakdown of how I put that cue together, that is available right now for the friends and family subscribers over at 52 Cues. So that's my Year of Taxi update. We'll see if Gotta Get Medieval will get forwarded. The current plan is to write another one of these. And then, again, the current plan is to return back to pulsing investigative tension cues, again, staying in my wheelhouse and getting a few more wins under my belt before I start getting really kind of experimental. But that's my Year of Taxi update. So, Mount Rushmore. Now, if you're not from the US, or maybe you're not familiar with it, this is a monument which was literally blasted out of the side of a mountain in South Dakota and features 4 prominent US presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. Now, complicated history notwithstanding, go Google it. It's not what this podcast is about. It represents kind of the best of American ideology. And I thought I would use that as a metaphor to talk about plugins which might as well be carved of stone in my DAW because they keep showing up. And I've got these broken down into 2 categories, 4 each, because 4 presidents, 4 each. And so they are going to be the sounds and the effects. So 4 of each. 4 sounds and 4 effects, which I just can't quit, which show up repeatedly over and over. And I'm going to show you talk about them, show you the plugin, and tell you why I think they have become so ubiquitous for me. So, first of all, the sounds. And by the way, any longtime listeners or viewers or anybody in the 52 Cues community could probably already see where this is going to be going. And this isn't an in-depth review of any of these plugins, and this certainly isn't an exhaustive list of every single plugin ever made. In fact, I want to hear what your Mount Rushmore of plugins would be, but these are mine. And so the sounds, the first one is going to be Omnisphere. And I've talked about this before. I slept on Omnisphere for a long time, feeling it was overpriced. It never goes on sale. Spectrasonics, they're a great company, but it was like $500. I'm like, it can't be really that great. And I saved my pennies and eventually got it. And I really didn't get it. Like I was like, okay, it's a synth that has, 4 oscillators that I can set up either as a sample, or I can set up as a synth, and I can load on effects, and I can put an arpeggiator. It seemed pretty run-of-the-mill synth. But it wasn't until I got into Matt Bowdler's presets, and we interviewed him on the podcast, but Matt Bowdler's presets over at theunfinished.co.uk, where something just clicked. Something just clicked to the point of where, I essentially bought every single one of his presets because they are that good. And while that is a ringing endorsement for The Unfinished and what Matt's doing over there, I think it's more an endorsement of the power of Omnisphere. Now, some synthesizers really bewildered me, continue to bewilder me, looking up like Massive from Native Instruments or even Zebra from Yuhi. And some of these other synthesizers just, I don't know, my eyes go crossed and I can't really make heads or tail of it. I'm not super engineer minded, and I would get turned around. And I felt that way initially about Omnisphere, but loading in Matt's patches helped me learn Omnisphere. And Matt's great. We have an interview, but this is just a patch loaded up. This is just one of his. It just sounds so good, and it's infinitely playable. And I've even started creating some of my own patches and loading sounds in. Here is a patch that I made where I loaded in my own vocal sample, like I was doing a overtone singing type of a sound. Let's put it down an octave. And then I've routed things to the mod wheel. So that's really, really cool. I created this tension pulse. I created a pad based off of a cymbal scrape. That has 2 cymbal patches, or 2 cymbal sounds from the same recording. So it's actually taking a little bit from that part of the recording, blending them together. And so here's another one. Taking a sound and creating my own synths out of them. And I'm just kind of getting started, but it's so good. And Omnisphere is so easy to use. It's so easy to route. It's so easy to create effects, and their effects routing. You have each one or an effects, 4 effects on each of the 4 oscillators. You can also bus them. You can also add another 4 effects on all of them. And the way this is laid out, reminds me very much of Reason. And one of the reasons I liked Reason was the tactile quality of it, the design aesthetic, to where when you look at a knob or a parameter that would be a knob on a piece of hardware, it looks like a knob. That's called skeuomorphism. And I really, really dig it. And so Omnisphere brings that to the table. And so, and you'll hear with many of these plugins that I'm going to be talking about today, the usability, the playability, the simplicity. And I know when you look at this seems really complex, but trust me, if I can get my brain around it, I think anybody can get their brain around this. The playability, usability, the relative simplicity, and the fact that they do what they do very well. Now, none of these plugins are perfect. Omnisphere isn't perfect. One of the things that I have a bit of a hang up with, and it really strikes more when I use some of their sonic extensions that they sell independently, is they're a little processor heavy, right? So they can be some processor hogs, and there's some glitches that will show up every now and then, and we're just little clicks and that kind of thing, and so you have to bounce into place. But I think the benefits far outweigh any of the negatives. So Omnisphere is the first. That's going to be my George Washington right there, front and center. Omnisphere. I could about write any type of cue using Omnisphere. It has guitar patches, it has synths, it has pulses, pads, atmospheres, soundscapes, percussion, even some drum sounds. I could about do an entire cue. In fact, I did a live stream. Well, I think I did it twice, where I literally randomized various sounds in Omnisphere. I hit random. I clicked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and whatever the sound was, I used. And then again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then used it. And so I committed to using whatever sounds came out of Omnisphere. And I was able to submit that cue. Not only submit that cue, but get it published. And it is currently out there in a library right now. And again, I don't think that's not me flexing my composition skills as much as it is speaking to the strengths of Omnisphere and how deep of a well it goes. And then the last thing I'll say about Omnisphere is there is a huge third-party support system. What I mean by that is there are so many folks making patches, patch libraries, extending beyond well beyond what Omnisphere stock has, which is already pretty astounding and admittedly a little bit overwhelming. But third-party support is huge with Omnisphere. You can make your own patches and some other sample libraries or some other synths. Creating your own patches and distributing them, that's they just make it overly complicated. Whereas with Omnisphere, makes it really, really, really simple. And so Spectrasonics, I think they understand that sharing sounds, selling sounds, distributing sounds is a real advantage. And so yeah, they're going to charge you $500 to use it right up front, but they don't charge like license fees and all that stuff later down the road. So Omnisphere is going to be front and center in my Mount Rushmore of plugins. So the second plugin, this one is a relatively newcomer, and it has to be Serato Sample. Again, I've done a video on Serato Sample, and the reason it is here, this is the Thomas Jefferson. There's a George Washington, Omnisphere right in front, and then right behind George Washington is going to be Thomas Jefferson. And the reason I love Serato Sample, yes, Logic has a sampler. Ableton has a sampler. Samplers are kind of a dime a dozen. Even Contact is great. But what Serato does, it does what it does, the one thing, exceptionally well. And second, maybe only to Ableton, I have found Serato to have the best sample stretching game in town. The second best. I think Ableton's the best. And if Ableton made a freestanding sampler plugin like this, I would buy it on day one. You hearing me, Ableton? If you want to pull out simpler and create, and even Logic sampler is pretty good, but there are some Ableton stock Logic or stock Ableton plugins I would love to have. The drum rack, Ableton drum rack, I'd love to have that over here in Logic. Oh well, I know I could rewire blah blah, but I don't know. We can't get into that. But it is just dead simple to use, and I use Serato Sample a couple of different ways. The first way is for sample manipulation and chopping. And I've got a little clav patch loaded in here. Let's see. All right, so that is just a splice loop that I picked up, and I can load it in and assign slicing by beats. So if I wanted quarter notes, right, and so I'm just stepping through my keyboard. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can actually see these. But if I wanted to chop things around and move them, and then if I wanted to take a slice and like reverse that one slice, or if I wanted to take that slice and then key shift it, and so just the possibilities seem endless. And again, other libraries can do this. Logic Sampler, I can take them and load them in. But Serato has been at the time stretching game quite a while. And the fact that they've taken essentially their DJ stretching algorithm and loaded it in so that you can create chopped samples, whether they're melodic like that or whether they are drum samples. Tell you what, let me put this to single beats. All right, so this is the full sample. All right, let's pitch the whole thing down. It's just, again, the possibilities seem endless. So easy sample chopping, easy looping, really, really dig that. But the second reason I really like Serato Sample is as an instrument player. Again, other samplers do this, but because of their stretching algorithm, I think it is superior. And I've loaded the same samples into Logic's Alchemy, into Logic's Multisampler, and it just sounds so good. So here is an 808 sample. Set it to glide. It just sounds so good. And one of the things it does really, really well is I can lock it in to where the sample will stay the same length regardless of where it's pitched. So if I take this sample and go up 2 octaves, go ahead and click that guy. So the sample doesn't get super short, turning off this kind of this sync tempo locking, which doesn't sound bad, but now I run into issues to where it's too short. So if I go ahead and stretch it, and I can actually sync it to the tempo of the session, or I can tempo individually. So 808s sound like that, and loading something like a bell sample. So this is a one-shot bell sample that I've loaded in, and so to be able to create little that just sounds so good. That is one bell sample. And as it goes goes down, it doesn't stretch out and get like so stretchy and weird. I'll turn off the stretch and show you what I mean. So this is the note stretched, not stretched. It's just literally slowing it down, but it's keeping it in the same, you know, it's keeping it pitch locked. Let me go up an octave. But now let me stretch it. Let me go the other way. So if I have something, that sounds okay, but when I put the stretching algorithm on, it doesn't sound perfect, but it sounds much better. And so I can take little one-shots from Splice or whatever, load them into the sampler, and because they're one-shots, they have all of the effects and everything already baked in, and it just sounds so good. But beyond all of that, it's super easy. It's super easy to use. So the last thing I'll say about Serato Sample is you've already heard it before. The flute sample for Game Time Decision. That's how the sample is chopped up. Right? That's how I used Serato Sample for that. Yep. So that's Serato Sample. Love it. Talked about it before. Now, the next two plugins, or the next two sounds, are in the same plugin, Contact. And Contact's a deep, deep instrument. And if we're talking just raw plugins, then Contact probably should be up there, right? Because it can hold so much. So I'm not really getting that pedantic about this. Instead, it's going to be two sound libraries, specifically in Contact, which find themselves showing up repeatedly. And the first one is Damage. Specifically, Damage 2, which I think if you're going to buy one, buy Damage 2. Don't buy Damage 1 because I believe Damage 2 is not just a sequel. It's like the original plus the expansion, right? And so I know technically they're different and they bring different things to the table, but if you're going to buy one, buy Damage 2. It is by Heavyocity, and if there's one thing Heavyocity does really well, it is percussion sounds, and it is manipulating these types of sounds, specifically with their Damage engine, and be able to create really crushed sounds. But beyond all of that, their cinematic percussion is fantastic. It just sounds so freaking good. And this is the Armageddon 2 ensemble, which I use religiously. And the other preset that I use is the Tom Barrage. So it doesn't have any taiko drums and that kind of thing. And I like how there are single drums or ensemble drums. And then single drums. Sounds so good. Then, like I mentioned, you have this crushing effect. So if you want to sound more saturated and dark, lowering that. Just nasty and sounds Really, really good. So anytime I do any big, epic, orchestral, cinematic stuff, even epic hip hop, Damage 2. Damage Drums by Heavyocity comes to the table. So love me some Damage. And then finally, the last plugin or the last sound I want to talk about is, and you knew it was going to be this one, Symphobia by Project Sam. They've recently updated their Symphobia 1, 2, 3, and 4 to the new layout, the all-in-one. Really, really good. And that update was free. They're constantly supporting it. And Symphobia is an orchestral ensemble plugin, which means that you're not going to get a violin solo, and you can't necessarily do granular orchestral programming with Symphobia, but what it does really well, which is ensemble orchestral playing. So it just sounds really, really good. You have mic positions, but without getting too fussy with mic positions. So that's close. You have short sounds, you have long sounds, and you have various parts of the orchestra. So here is the brass section. And this is actually tempo synced. You have some other aleatoric effects. And so this is one of the things that really separates Symphobia, which has all of these advanced orchestral articulations, which can be really hard to program, nearly impossible to program, and even harder to find. Those sound great. All right, so that's some brass, that's some strings going into the woodwinds. Some clusters. Some growls. Some more effects. I'll go up here. Some slaps. Yeah, just really these advanced articulations that can be really, really tough to find. Now, the library itself is relatively old, I guess, in terms. I think it's going on 10 years old now, probably maybe 9 or 10 years old, but they're constantly supporting it, and it just sounds good out of the box. And that's one of my prerequisites. If I'm going to put a plugin up on my Mount Rushmore, it needs to just sound good without a ton of fussing. And I love that. The interface is really, really easy. And congrats, Project Sam, on updating these plugins to this version 2. The interface is easy to use, and I like not having to go in. Like if I were, this is how it kind of was previously. You'd have to go in and then search, go into your string section, and then bring in like that. And it was just, yeah. So here is the original layout versus the new layout. Yeah, huge win, Symphobia. Well done. And I think it's the same samples themselves, even though they keep cleaning them up. But it's night and day. It's night and day. It's so easy, so much easier to use. So those are the sounds that I would put on my Mount Rushmore. Omnisphere out in front, the George Washington. Closely behind would be Serato Sample. And then some Damage percussion, followed along with Symphobia, taking up the Abraham Lincoln position, right? If we were talking about, correlating them to the actual monument. So those are the 4 sounds. Now, as far as effects goes, I have 4 effects which also deserve their own Mount Rushmore. And the first, and again, longtime viewers and patrons and friends and family, community members, are there. You know what's coming. The first one is the Pro-Q3 by Fabfilter. Yes, and EQ gets the George Washington spot on this monument. And the reason is, well, let me back up. I was in a group of composers one time, and I posited the question, what's the one plugin that you wish you would have gotten a lot sooner? What's the one plugin you wish you would have gotten a lot sooner? And more than one person said the Fabfilter Pro-Q3. And I thought kind of all EQs were built similarly and they're all created equal, but they're really, really not. And as the EQ that I was using before this was the stock Logic EQ, which is really, really good. And I still use the stock Logic EQ, but the Pro-Q3, what it brings to the table is a suite of tools that are easy to use, easy to get your brain around, and just sound so good, and tons of functionality here. And so you have your standard, EQ that you can add here and put up the frequency spectrum. And as far as I know, this is a limitless number of EQs that you can add, along with some really unique different types of shapes, from your bell curves to your shelves, to your passes, including band isolation and S curves and single line. So lots of different types of EQs and EQ shapes. And so that would be great. That would be great as it is. But the real power for me came from the ability to sidechain and to create dynamic EQ. So I've got a track pulled up here that I literally whipped together in just a few minutes for this podcast, featuring some of the sounds that we've been talking about, including Symphobia, little sample bell, some Omnisphere, that 808 sample, the damaged drums, and the Serato Sample drums slowed way down so you get this kind of halftime effect. But let's say that my 808 is kicking really hard, but I don't want the low end of, let's see, which one? Like, I don't want the low end of the drums to drop out when the 808 isn't sounding, if you're tracking with me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a Pro-Q3 on my drums here. And if I were to look at my 808, then that would sound and look like that. So that's where the 808 is showing. Okay, so I can do some overlap here. And because I have Pro-Q3 also on my drums, I can turn on and show where the drums are hitting as well. So going back into here, let's turn on that guy so I can see where my 808 and my drums, because I have the Pro-Q3 on both plugins. So I want the drums to get out of the way of the 808 when the 808 is occurring, but when the 808 isn't occurring, I don't want to lose the low end, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm here on my drums and I'm going to notch out, because that's right where that's occurring. And then I am going to create, let's start this way. I'm going to create a dynamic EQ here. And it's as simple as just grabbing the edge of this. And this isn't an exhaustive Pro-Q3 tutorial. I'm just showing you kind of how simple this is. So I'm creating a dynamic EQ, which is all well and good and fine. But the real magic happens when I sidechain. So the input here is going to be from the instrument, which is going to be the 808. And indicate the little button there to sidechain. And so now whenever the 808 hits, it's going to push this frequency out of the way. And then when the 808 releases, that low frequency comes back. Let me turn off. Does that make sense? And so I hope I didn't overcomplicate it, but how simple it is to create a sidechain EQ instead of getting into sidechain compression and all of that stuff. And that's not ultimately what this is about, but little things like that have been absolute game changers for me. And so when I need to create just garden variety EQs, I'll reach for stock Logic EQ. Nearly every time. It works great. It sounds great. Probably needs an honorable mention. It's fine. Thank you, Logic. You're fine. You do a really good job. But for surgical EQing, the Fabfilter, in my opinion, is the best EQ in town. And I know that there are several EQs, and I know that Cubase has a really good stock EQ, and that's great. But for my money, Pro-Q3 needs to be in your toolbox. The second plugin, that is an effect plugin, which is literally on every single one of my tracks because it's in my template, and that is the East-West Spaces 2. Specifically, the preset for the Reynolds Hall. And the reason I like this is I can set up various parts of the orchestra that each have their own reverb response, but because it's all recorded in the same place, they all blend and mesh well together really, really well. So if I were to put, let's put Spaces here on to, I'm pulling this up, there we go. So I am on my strings here. And so let's go in and put this, let's see, it's a low string. So we'll put violin and cellos. Tell you what, let me bust this. So I'm going to create a new send here. And in that send, I'm going to put East-West Spaces 2, violoncello, in fact, I think I still have, there we go. And since I'm loading on my own reverb here, let's dry out the Symphobia reverb, which is a pretty good tip. If you're putting on your own reverbs, then dry out the sound itself and without it. So you're just getting the room. All right, and here is the bell. So I'm going to put the same reverb onto here. By the way, you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to choose this preset. And since it's a high melody, let's go ahead and put it and the violins and violas here. Right, and then for the percussion, let's create a new one there. And we are going to go into Spaces 2. And we're going to put the percussion. Do the same thing. I'm going to dry these out. So I'm going to I'm removing the hall, removing this guy that's kind of low frequency. Let's remove a bit of the room. Pretty dry. And then load in a little bit more of that guy. And the Spaces reverb just sounds so good. And it literally is in my template. And I should just go ahead and buy it, because really by this point, one of the few reasons I'm keeping my Composer Cloud subscription is for Spaces 2, along with a handful of percussion. It's probably overkill, and by now I could have just bought it, but Spaces 2, for my money, is my absolute go-to reverb. 100%. The next plugin that would be on my Mount Rushmore, just like Serato Sample, is relatively new and is going up in rank. And this was almost on my runners-up list, but I went ahead and put it here on the primary list, and that is going to be RC20. The RC20 plugin, let me pull it up here, is a lo-fi plugin, but it's more than that. You can do kind of saturation. You can make things sound like drum breaks. You can add vinyl effects and all of those typical type of lo-fi things. But the fact that it can do coloration, it could add reverb, you can deal or control stereo width, add flutter, distortion, you could add pitch bends. It's really, really good. So here it is in the drums. So I have a preset just called vinyl. Some wobble, add even more space. I can narrow it. Yeah, so I use it for saturation, and I also use it for lo-fi sounds. If I were to put this up on the strings, which how it sounds on its own, the strings on their own. And so let's find a preset and let's make this sound like VHS. Let's remove some of the wobble. So it's not so, sounds like an old tape. A little bit more space, a little bit more magnetic. It's like a sound designer's dream here, and it sounds so good. Going into my drums here. So I've got one already set up here. Oops. And I'm going to select drum breaks. And it makes, essentially, it makes other or standard drum sounds sound like vintage drum breaks. So how do we sound now? So the RC20, it's not that expensive, and it is by XLN Audio, I believe. I hope that's right. XLN Audio does does retro color. Yes, XLN audio. And by the way, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies or anything. Just these are plugins that I have found I use repeatedly. So RC20, retro color for saturation and advanced kind of distortion. And then finally, I'm gonna turn off all these RC20s here. All right, and then finally, the plugin, which is the Abraham Lincoln, is going to be Ozone. Ozone is the plugin that I use for my mastering. I use it literally on every single track. I jumped in, I believe, in Ozone 6. It's up to Ozone 10 these days, and it just works. And I'm glad that Izotope has kind of moved away from their using presets and all of that, because that's what that's you take the brain and take the thinking out of mastering, which is helpful. But it made it feel more like a consumer tool, and it's really, really not. It's for folks like me who knows what, how things should sound, but also knows a little bit, but don't want to get too far into the weeds here. And so Ozone is my mastering tool of choice. I'm going to load up my init patch. I have a patch that I've created called init. So it's just my initialized patch, and it brings in all of the plugins that I frequently use, including the EQ. And I'm going to go ahead and do a quick master. And by the way, I've talked about Ozone before. Many of these plugins I have talked about before. And I did a whole video on how I use Ozone to master. But if I were just going to master this super quick, tell you what, I'm going to bring in the input so I have a little bit of headroom to work with. All right, little EQ here. Let's call this cinematic. Little dynamic EQ. Some low-end focus. Just to dial in the low end of that 808. Look at some dynamics here. Let's trim off just the tops here. Now I'm going to do a little bit more transient shaping. It's a multi-band transient shaping. Let that low end really pop. There we go, just moving up the frequency spectrum here. In the exciter, This is just really quick and dirty. I haven't gone through and EQ'd this. Some little tube saturation for my low mids, my high mids. A little bit of tape saturation there. Had even more sparkle on the very, very top. My imager, it's my stereo spreading. It's all of the components of a mastering chain just in one turnkey plugin. Are already pretty wide. Going up the frequency spectrum, my stereo width, my EQ too. So I'm going to EQ the mids, leave room for dialogue, boost it here, boost it there, give it a little bit more lift. Let's go to the sides. Make sure we got nothing too far in the super lows. Pull that down. And then finally my maximizer. I'm going to shoot for about minus 14 LUFS. All right, so that's unmastered. That's with the mastering. I mean, I'm just saying, I mean, yeah, that took what? Maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes versus that, which sounds kind of dull and lifeless, versus that. So Ozone speaks for itself. I absolutely swear by Ozone for mastering and for loudness and for polish. I know that there are plugins that will do this. There are plugins which will do it better. And some, purists insist on like putting their entire mastering chain as a series of plugins. That feels exhausting to me, especially if you're thinking about writing or the possibility or the need to have to write hundreds of these cues. You've got to find short, quick, easy ways to do the thing that you need to do. And so for me, Ozone fits the bill. In fact, all of these plugins from Omnisphere, Serato Sample, Damage, Damage 2, Symphobia, Pro-Q3, Spaces, RC20, Ozone, it's all about easy, quick, simple to use, simple to navigate tools that don't get in the way, So those are my Mount Rushmore. Those are my 4 plugins. Now, there are 2 runners up that I just want to mention. One is don't fall out, but actually by Waves. It is the OneKnob pressure plugin. I love the OneKnob series because it does what it says on the tin, right? You just turn the knob, and I find it to be the best side chain compression tool. So if I have my drums here, right, and I've got my OneKnob pressure, and if I turn, let me get my face out of the way. If I turn on my OneKnob, it adds real easy punch. So that's the drums without and with. Let me turn that off. And with. So anytime I need drums to really punch through the mix, I reach for the OneKnob pressure. It, just like Spaces, it is in my template. And then the last runner-up is BBC SO. Like Symphobia, BBC SO sounds good out of the box, and Spitfire has managed to do what I thought would be impossible, which is create a plugin which is easy to navigate, easy to use, and you don't get into super fiddly key switching or like with East-West's old system of archaic abbreviations, which I felt like I needed a decoder ring just to figure out what articulation I was kind of trying to get to. And so BBC SO does that. They have cracked the code. Let me get this happening here. Load up the spiccatos. It just sounds good out of the box. Now, there are some downsides. The first is the plugin's a little bit sluggish, and it's still relatively new. I guess by now it would have to be like 3 years old, right? BBC SO, has it been that long since Spitfire launched their own sampler engine? I think so. So it's been a minute. It's been at least 3 years. So maybe it's not new. But it's still a little processor intensive and can take a while to load up samples. But it's understandable because when you load up a patch, you're loading up all of these articulations, and there are a lot of them. And so as far as the turnkey, if we're talking turnkey with mastering, it would be Ozone. If I needed to buy one orchestral library that can give me the most mileage, it would be BBC SO. You have all of the sections, all across the entire orchestra. You have first chair violins, first chair viola, cello, so you can create a string quartet if you wanted to. And they just sound really, really good. And you have tons of options, tons of articulations, tons. And I mean, tons kind of, these are a lot of mic positions that you're giving us. 3.5 pages of mic positions. So again, as far as the most bang for your buck, I think BBC SO, and it's exhaustive light, and it is expensive. It's like $600 or $700, I think. It is expensive, but like I said, they have managed to make using really granular orchestral sounds as painless as possible. I think they've done a stellar job, much better than any of the others that I've personally worked with. And while it's more of a lift to use than, say, Symphobia, when I need to add really real strings and I need like granular control over what this instrument's doing, what that instrument doing, splitting across, the violins, violas, cellos, and everything, then I reach for BBC SO every single time. So those are my two runners up that didn't quite get on the monument. But what about you? What are your plugins? What are your 4 sounds that you can't live without, that just keep showing up? What are the 4 effects? I know I've missed some. These are just the ones that work the best for me, and I would love to hear from you. So please let me know in the comments below. I do read all of those, and I would love to hear from you. And if you disagree, let me know about that too. I will be happy to check out your comment. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we return, we are going to be checking out a solo jazz piano cue from 52Q's member Simon Armitage. But first, a couple of words from Mrs. 52Q's Shannon Croft to tell you all about the community.
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52Q's podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52Q's isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52Q's community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52qs.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52qs.com.
That was Head Over Heels by Simon Armitage. Simon, thank you so much for sending this along. He sent this along during our Week 10 weekly feedback thread, and he said that I've been experimenting with NI, Native Instruments Noir piano, for the latest track. Hope you like it. And by the way, Simon is a really talented pianist, and go follow him on Spotify. We'll have a link to his music out there. Really enjoyed your playing. No real notes as far as production music. For kind of a background cocktail jazz, I think it's absolutely perfect, and the mix sounded great. The reason I wanted to play this here on the podcast is, first of all, just because I wanted to listen to it. It's really, really good. But I also wanted to point out one of the caveats of using these highly sampled, specialized, stylized pianos like Native Instruments Noir, as well as like Keyscape and some of those, which are so hyper sampled and so detailed that sometimes it can create some problems. And I'm going to point something out that Simon, you might already kind of be hip to, you might already kind of hear it, but for you listeners, I'm going to point something out that I hope doesn't ruin your enjoyment of any of these types of things. And they are two things. First of all, the sustain pedal or the damper pedal engagement sound. So when the damper pedal comes off the strings, you get like a little f type of a sound. Because of the way that the damper pedal works, it's the big bar with these felt wedges which slide in between the strings, and when that gets released, then that creates kind of this ambient noise, which is really, really important when making a piano sound authentic in MIDI, right? Those noises are important because when they're not there, it sounds a little artificial. The other sound is the sound of the hammers, which is the mechanical sound of all of the wood levers working inside of a piano to strike the string, because it's a mechanical instrument. You hit a key, all these levers and dowel rods and everything pushes a hammer onto a string. But the downside is that in the quest for realism, we can often overly emphasize these realistic components, which on their own sound really, really good, but too many or too much of it is, I think, for me, I think it betrays the performance. And so I'm going to play, and I want you to listen out, listeners. I want you to listen out for the sound of the damper pedal, which is a little f sound, and listen for the sound of the hammers. There it was. There it was again. All right. So, and again, Simon, I'm not at all picking on you. I hear this quite a lot. I hear it when I listen to these playlists. Do you hear the little right after? That's the sound of the damper pedal. And you can hear the sound of the hammers. A little click in the background. You can hear the clicks. Again, once you tune your ears to it, you almost can't unhear it. And so the sound of the hammers, the sound of the damper, I think they need to be brought back. And the good news is nearly every single one of these piano libraries, which have these really hyper-realistic piano noises, you can actually dial them back. And so I would dial them way, way back, because what it's sounding like to me is it sounds like a piano that needs to be serviced. And listening to these playlists on Spotify, and I listen to like music for sleep and sleep jazz for sleep, and those really exposed piano playlists. And a lot of times there are live pianos that sound like this, right? But they don't have to. And I think in the quest for intimacy and realism, I feel like libraries like Noir and even like the Native Instruments Grandeur and all of that, it's great. But in the quest for realism, I feel like we've swung too far. And it reminds me of, I can't remember if I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I first got into using virtual instruments, I got the Roland Sound Canvas, or I didn't get it. I was in the computer lab at Appalachian State. And so I got into using the Roland Sound Canvas, and they had an acoustic guitar sample library, which I thought sounded amazing. And it did sound amazing for, 1994. But the thing that really impressed me the most was they had a whole separate patch sound set, which was fret noises. And I thought, oh man, that sounds freaking real. That sounds like an actual player. And so I recorded my guitar part. There was like a 12-tone guitar, which was completely unplayable because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just, sophomore in college, junior in college, writing for guitar. I'd never played acoustic guitar, let alone classical guitar. So I wrote a 12-tone serial guitar piece, which was literally unplayable. Handed it to a guitar friend, and they're like, nope. Parenthetically, I ended up rearranging it for 2 harpsichords. But anyway, so I was programming it, and I put all of the fret noise, because I programmed the string parts, and then I went, okay, fret noise. And so I would listen, and then and so I played it back for that same guitar friend, and they said, wow, Dave, it sounds like your guitarist is having a fit in the recording, and they don't know what they're doing. I put so much fret noise that it became a distraction, and it actually made it sound less realistic because there was so much egregious, obnoxious, gratuitous fret noise. And so I think with some of these piano libraries, and Simon, yours is not the worst I've heard here, but I think some of these piano libraries, like I said, in their quest for realism, put these sounds in, and the patches sound great, but I think there's just like gratuitous piano noise that like piano technicians work really, really hard in eliminating. And so they're turning that error into a feature. And so that would be my only real recommendation, Simon, is to back down the mechanical, the release sound of the samples and the hammer sounds there in the Noir. But again, impeccable playing. I cannot complain. I'm an absolute fan of your work. In fact, I'll give you a little boop, give you a follow. Would love for you to, if you're watching, to go over to Spotify and show Simon some love. He's got a big following. Good job, man. 18,000 listeners. Well done. Really well done. Like I said, Simon sent this along during our week 10 search, and we put searches out, and they're not really searches, they're just weekly feedback threads every single week where folks post their cues and they leave feedback for others. They receive feedback. Right now, we are currently collecting for week 11, and I will be featuring one of the cues from week 11 in next week's podcast. But if you found that feedback video helpful and you would want feedback on your own cues outside of the podcast, then why don't you head over to 52cues.com/coaching and order up your own feedback video where I break down everything from the music theory side of things to titles, to mixing, to mastering, to even things like, hey, there's too much piano sounds. There's too much mechanical noise in your cue. So why don't you head over once again to 52cues.com/coaching and order up your own feedback video. And while you're there, you can check out our one-on-one coaching sessions, and you can go ahead and sign up for the Spring Mastermind, which starts April 3rd. As of today, there are 5 seats left, and that is limited to 6 seats. And it is a 12-week program where we unpack being in the industry. It's a 30,000-foot view. We come together and we talk about issues in the industry. We talk about everything from finding a library to pitching to working with references, to time management, project management, and everything in between. So if that's something that's interesting to you and you are really looking to take the next serious step in your career, then head over to 52cues.com/mastermind and you can sign up today. Registration does close at the end of the month, but as of right now, then we still have 5 seats left, and we would love for you to join us. Oh, and in addition to the price of the mastermind, also included is 3 one-on-one Zoom sessions throughout those 12 weeks. It is a 12-week program. We meet every single week on Zoom for, here lately it's been going about 2 hours. We meet for about 2 hours, listen to each other's cues, talk about topics. It's really, really fantastic, and would love to have you on board with us if you're into that. So that's going to do it for me this week. You definitely want to tune in next week, where I want to talk about books that maybe you should read. Specifically, books which may or may not be music books, but books like, I'll go ahead and give you a free one, The Miracle Morning. Transformed my whole workday, transformed my outlook on getting things done. And we're going to be talking about books that you should probably have in your library, whether you read books or whether you listen to books. That's me. I'm an Audible type of a guy. That's what we're going to be talking about next week. But like I said, that's going to do it. Once again, a huge thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs who help keep all of this going. Please know that I love and appreciate you, and none of this would be possible without your support. So yeah, that's going to do it. I hope that you've had a great week 10, and I know that your week 11 is going well. How do I know that, friends? Because I know and believe and trust that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2023 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52cues.com.